episode 488, PBIS, Discipline, and Compassion Fatigue.
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
Behavior management. Recently, I had an email from a teacher who begged for help. She said she just could not get her classroom under control. And so I reached out to my friend, Melissa Mann, who was on episode 167. And as she and I were talking back and forth about this particular teacher's problems, I posted an article from USA Today about a school that had implemented a system called PBIS, and it had gone very wrong. And wow, it just opened a cascade of comments, people all on one side or the other about PBIS. And Melissa is somewhat of an expert on PBIS and has lots to share. So first, Melissa, talk to us about PBIS and also help us understand, how does this system go wrong? Like, it sounds like some schools are really implementing it in a way that's not effective.
PBIS is not just a box program. You can't go and download something. You can get curriculum for PBIS, but PBIS is not one of these box kind of canned programs in a box kind of things. And so it's going to look different at every school. But from what I've seen with just different comments and things, the part where some of it's going wrong is behavior in general. And I think sometimes we forget behavior doesn't always mean that thing that gets you sent to the office. Behavior could just mean it's how somebody acts, as in the response to something. So if you're rewarding appropriate behavior, which is part of PBIS, that's great. But if you don't ever go through those target behaviors, for example, say a student's blurting out in class, and so you're rewarding those kids who aren't blurting out in class, you're doing great, and giving them all that positive part there. But if you're not going through and working on social skill stories and modeling and some role playing and things to teach that student who is blurting out how to not blurt out, that's where I think some of the struggles going at it, because some of the kids are saying, well, so-and-so is getting all the rewards. Why should I even try to change my behavior? And I think that's a struggle for teachers. In that article that you posted, some of that frustration it seemed in there was that it was coming from top down. And another thing with behavior in general is you've got to build that relationship with that student. If you come down as that whole disciplinarian and you've never taken that time to get to know that kid's story and what that kid's brought into that room, some of that behavior may be environmental. Say they yell and get disrespectful or yell and scream when they have something happen. Well, what if that's all they've ever seen? So you're having to kind of reframe some of that behavior, but getting to know your students lets you know what behaviors you're dealing with.
Well, it's very, very rare that I ever have to send anybody to the office. It's been like, twice this year in my new school. It just doesn't happen very often. But there were some teachers who were told under the quote PBIS that they could never send a student to the office, that they had to handle everything themselves. Is that part of this, or is that a misimplementation?
From my research and everything I've done, it is some of that misimplementation, because you do have to have some kind of consequences for some of that behavior. I do think some teachers may overuse sending kids to the office, but you've also got to look at the fact that some behaviors, they've got to be sent to the office. When it's something that is harmed as other kids, it's got to be something dealt with on another level with things, but it's got to be where you've got a buy-in from everybody. But then you've also got to have, the office has to be on board, the teachers have to be on board. It's got to be a school-wide thing. Most of the stories I'm seeing where you see the teachers frustrated, everybody in the school's not in that buy-in. PBIS.org is very good to go through and say, what is it? It takes you step by step. It defines everything, what PBIS looks like. And my favorite one is PBIS World. It goes through different behaviors and things on there. And, just like from out of seat name calling, and it gives teachers just suggestions and things they can do. Some schools are using PBIS in the RTI model too. And so that may be where some of those office referrals are coming out, have you done all the interventions to get to that kind of thing? So it's going to look different at every school. It's not one of those approaches I don't feel like that you can just go, okay, it's going to work here, because everybody's going to read in their own version because you're dealing with different kids. The kids at your school, the kids at my school, they're not the same. So you've got to handle and kind of set out the expectations, and you do the basic steps, but the implementation of it's going to look differently.
Well, and I know that there's different tiers, but for example, I'm on the PBIS website and I said, okay, lying and cheating. And it says that, here's some things you can do. You can talk to the parent, teach relationship skills, teach social skills. And then there's lots of different tier 1 interventions. But then it says, if you've tried tier 1 for 6 months, take me to tier 2. Well, for me, cheating or dishonesty is an immediate trip to the office, and it's a 0 that I don't drop. Like, is that wrong according to PBIS? Because I kind of think that it's like the parent who counts to 3 to get their child quiet. They get quiet at 3. They don't get quiet at 1, 2,
Well, when you're starting to look at the tier model, you're looking at that student that may have more going on than just I cheated so I can get a good grade on that test. You may have that kid who cheating's becoming a pattern of a behavior. Sometimes, you deal with that lying, cheating, and it's a one-time offense. You send them to the office and they change that behavior. But then some of those kids, it becomes a way of life for them, and a pattern of behavior. So then you've got to look at, how are you going to intervene? How are you going to go through and look at what you can do to change that behavior? And that's where some of the PBIS interventions and things like that come in. It's looking at more of the, is that student cheating because they don't know how to do it?
Yeah, but the tough thing is it's just giving excuses when it's not appropriate behavior. But let me ask you this. I had some students who misbehaved for me yesterday. They haven't really misbehaved much at all, but they were just off the chain. And I talked with another teacher at the lunch table, and she said, wow, I had that same problem too. And I had just talked to them before your class. And I mean, when you have classes that change, is there a time for teachers to communicate and work together? I mean, I don't feel like we should be alone in handling disruptive behavior if it's a pattern.
No, you shouldn't. And we've implemented the PLC process this year for professional learning communities. And some of that discipline discussion happens in those meetings. So as a content area or grade level, you're discussing, okay, how are we going to handle when this happens? But you've got to have the same rules. So that way, if the student's in trouble in your class, if they did it in that other one, they can't get away with it in your class as well. It's like a kid that goes to say, mom tells them no, and then they go ask dad for the thing and dad gives in. You don't want to be that situation where that student is playing 2 teachers against each other. And I think that comes from admin. If this is where you're going to go and you're going to do this school-wide effort, you've got to give your teachers time to have those discussions, and you've got to set the framework of what are our expected behaviors in the school? What are our expected behaviors in classroom? And what does it look like in the lunchroom? What does it look like in the hallways? Because transition time is huge for some of those misbehaviors to possibly happen.
One thing that disturbs me about some of the behavior management stuff that I see is that I feel like the words right and wrong are being taken out of it. Lying is wrong. Hitting somebody is wrong. Being honest and truthful is right. Is that happening, or am I making that up?
It is. It's happening. It's come to the point where it's almost, yes, you and I know it's wrong, but if a student comes to school and they've never been taught that that's wrong, we're almost having to teach what right and wrong look like.
Yeah, but how can you do that when you don't have the words? Or do you think it's that some parents don't agree that it's always wrong?
I think you've got kids coming to school with different values and different way they've been raised. And sometimes teachers are the ones parenting. So you've got parents who are making sure their child never has to deal with any wrong issue. And then you've got some that are holding their kids accountable. And I think that's coming to more society, it seems like, as the years have gone on. Take social media, for example. It says you're supposed to be 13 in order to have a social media account. Most kids, though, there's a lot under 13, but their parents have let them do it. And that's some things you kind of have to look at too with it is we're teaching, we're parenting, and a lot's been placed on the shoulders of teachers today.
One of the things that disturbed me the most is I don't think a teacher or a student should ever have to be scared to walk into their classroom. When I was in business, I had an employee who we had to let go. and employee threatened bodily harm to me. So my company actually hired a security person to watch me in my house for 2 weeks because they were committed to keeping me safe doing my job. And nobody is doing that for teachers. Some teachers are scared of their students and are being told you can't send that student out. You can't send them to the office. That's not right.
It's not. And at that point, that's where that admin support's got to come in. Teaching's not a job you can do in isolation. If you're dealing with those kind of things, you've got to make sure you're reaching out to other people and talking about it and stuff. And self-care is important. The secondary trauma and its effect on teachers is very real, and it's getting more prevalent as the day goes on because we're dealing with more things, the stories the kids bring in, the things happening in the classroom. Especially this time of the year, we push ourselves to such a limit as educators that it's hard to keep going, but you've got to do those things that help you because the behaviors are going to increase. That's why PBIS is out. It's because we're trying to deal with the students in the room and we're trying new ways and things, but we've got to give to ourselves too. Self-care is a good practice.
I do hope, teacher, that you'll tweet me at CoolCatTeacher or email me, Vicki@CoolCatTeacher.com, and share your thoughts. We'll also include Melissa's information in the show notes as well as these resources so that you can reach out to her. She certainly is an expert in PBIS and quite a few other discipline techniques. And teachers, just know that if somebody's having success, we can learn from that person as we innovate and as we learn, and we can become better teachers and we can level up. You can do it. Your job is so important. No, these are not easy times, but we can do this. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. You can download the show notes and see the archive at coolcatteacher.com/podcast. Never stop learning.